Welcome to End of Life University podcast. I'm Dr. Karen Wyatt, hospice physician and author, bringing you information and inspiration on preparing for the end of life by living fully today. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today for another episode. This is episode number 108. And today I have something interesting to discuss with you. Titled 3 Keys to Living and Dying Consciously. And if you've listened to this podcast before, you will know that I always sign off at the end with kind of my 3 wishes for you to remember at the end of every single podcast. And so I am going to explain the meaning behind those 3 wishes. So we'll get to that a little bit later on. If you're new to the podcast, this podcast is kind of an offshoot of the End of Life University interview series, which started back in 2013. In the interview series, I talk with experts in all areas of the end of life and post those online twice a month, 2 different interviews every month through the website eoluniversity.com, and it's free. You can sign up for the mailing list and you'll get notifications whenever a new interview is being posted. And over the years, we've had some really fantastic interviews and presentations by speakers from all over the country, even all over the world, talking about the work they do related to death and dying. So if you're interested in the subject at all, you might want to sign up for the mailing list at eoluniversity.com, because that will get you the emails that come, so you'll learn about the upcoming speakers in the series, and you can tune in whenever you're interested. Not all of them might inspire you, but you can tune in whenever you're interested. And so I do feature some of those interviews from the archives here on the podcast, particularly if I'm traveling or away. And other times I share live current interviews that are not part of the series, and I also share with you my own thoughts. So sometimes, like today, it'll just be me talking and sharing with you my observations and my thoughts about end-of-life issues. So I'm glad you're here on the podcast listening, but you might also enjoy eoluniversity.com if you want to check out that website. As far as announcements, if you've been listening for a while, you know that I am getting ready for an amazing trip to Italy, which is going to be like a walking, sightseeing, biking, research, eating, drinking wine, an amazing trip through Italy for 1 month. I'll be there. And I'm doing some research and gathering information for a new book that I'm writing on grief. And I'm leaving on the trip tomorrow, one day after the broadcast of this interview. If you're listening to it later, I'll already be in Italy, or if it's a lot later, I might already be home from Italy. But for those of you who've been following along, it's now time for my trip. I've been working extremely hard for the last month. I guess I've been getting ready for the trip, but also getting the interview series and this podcast ready, because I've pre-recorded a number of episodes for the podcast and interviews for End of Life University. I have them all set up to post automatically while I'm gone, and emails ready to send out to go out to people. And so that's been a lot of work. It's basically been double work, because I did a month's worth of work for the month I'll be gone during the month before I left. So for the last month, I've been working doubly hard, but also doing research and prepping for the trip and for the journey I'll be taking to decide what I want to see and where to go. So anyway, I'm excited that the time for the trip is here, and I'm ready to go and really looking forward to it. So if you're interested in following photos from my trip, you can follow me on Instagram or Facebook. I'll be posting photos there from time to time during my trip, depending on the availability of Wi-Fi, I guess. to do those, but I will be posting them Instagram and Facebook. And you can go to the show notes for this episode, eoulupodcast.com, and look for episode number 108. And there will be links in the show notes to my Instagram and Facebook pages so that you can just become a follower, and then you can see where I am and see the photos of what I'm doing if you're interested in that. So other announcements, this podcast is supported through generous contributions on my page at patreon.com/EOLU. And for more than a year now, I've had donors and patrons who have signed up and have been contributing just $1 or $2 a month, sometimes more, toward helping defray the financial expenses of creating and producing and broadcasting the podcast and the End of Life University interview series. And my latest supporter on Patreon that I would like to send a huge thank you to is Rich Hayes. Rich is a hospice chaplain, and he wrote a note to me and said, I just wanted to thank you for what you shared in episode number 102. That was an episode where I talked about dreams I had as a hospice doctor of patients who had died. And Rich says, I'm a hospice chaplain and could relate to your stories of the dreams. And so I want to thank you so much, Rich, for reaching out to send me a message and also helping to support the podcast through Patreon. And you can find out more about Rich's work at his website, which is richhayes, HAYES.com, richhayes.com. And Rick has a book you can purchase there called God Made Simple. And reading about your book, Rich, I really want to buy that and read the book. It sounds wonderful. So richhayes.com, God Made Simple. Thank you, Rich, for becoming a supporter of the podcast. And if you're listening and you're interested in becoming a supporter as well, you can go to patreon.com/EOLU and learn how to sign up and donate $1 or $2 every month to keep the podcast on the air. And when you become a patron, I will thank you publicly on the podcast and also promote your work to the listeners of this podcast. And you'll also get access to monthly hospice happy hour Q&A calls, which I send out every month, where I answer your questions to me about end-of-life issues. So that's patreon.com/EOLU. And thanks again to everyone who took the time and made the effort to sign up there. I'm so appreciative. And so we'll get on to the subject for today. And I titled it 3 Keys to Living and Dying Consciously. And I'm going to give you a tip that in an upcoming episode of the podcast, actually while I'm traveling, so I've already recorded this one, it will be episode number 112. I'll be sharing an archived interview with Ken Wilber, who's a philosopher who talks about conscious dying through the lens of the death of his wife. And so that will be an amazing episode. That's number 112. So coming up in about 4 weeks from today, you'll be able to listen to Ken Wilber talk about conscious dying, because that's a subject that's very dear to my heart. But today's topic is 3 keys to living and dying consciously, because one of the best ways to die consciously is to actually live consciously. So whenever we talk about death, I feel it's so important that we talk about life and how we live, because death doesn't matter very much if it doesn't inform us or teach us how to live life differently. And if we don't ever wake up within our lives while we're living and alive, we will not be able to have a conscious death. We will still die. We will still go through the process of dying and death. But if we never wake up, our dying process itself will also not be conscious. And so the most important thing to accomplish is to wake up now and become conscious of death while we're still alive, so that we can live our lives conscious of the fact that we're here for a short while, and that prepares us to have a conscious death as well. And so, as I mentioned before, at the end of every single episode of this podcast, I close with 3 wishes for you, and those are face your fears, be ready, and love your life. And I'm going to talk in detail about each one of those 3 wishes so that you'll have a better understanding of what I mean when I send you off with those 3 wishes. So first we'll talk about face your fear. And it's so important that we begin at this place. When we're working toward living and dying consciously, fear is actually the greatest enemy of consciousness in many ways, because fear is what causes us to retreat and to want to go back to sleep, to avoid reality, avoid life as it is, because life itself contains suffering. And our fear is the fear of suffering and the fear of ultimately our own death. And when we cannot cope with our fear and we hide our heads in the sand, or we run away from the realities of life in order to just protect ourselves and defend ourselves against thinking about or seeing the suffering that comes with real true life, we also avoid the very process that would help us grow, become more enlightened, become more evolved, and live life with more joy and more love. It sounds counterintuitive that facing death helps us live life more fully, but that's actually how it is. And so when I say face your fear, I'm really talking about it's time to wake up to the fact that every single one of us will die. There's no escaping that. There is no alternative. Every one of us is on a track toward the death of our physical body. It's absolutely going to happen, and we can't do anything to prevent that from happening, no matter how many false illusions we're sold, especially through the healthcare system, and believing in that we can have surgeries and procedures done, and we can take anti-aging medications, and we can prevent aging, we can prevent illness, we can prevent disease. But ultimately, we are designed to be mortal. We are designed to die. These physical bodies of ours are designed to ultimately break down and dissolve away. And every living thing in nature, not everything in nature on this planet and in the universe, has that same code written into it. The code of ultimately dissolving away and falling apart. And we are part of that. We are part of that structure. And so to stay sane and to truly evolve and to truly grow in our lives and become conscious, we have to begin by accepting our own mortality, accepting the fact that we are going to die, and facing up to it, that it's normal. It's also written into our code in our primitive brains to be fearful of our own death, to be fearful of things that threaten our lives. And so we have to be able to accept and look at that fear and hold it in front of us within our vision, because that's a normal part of who we are. Within our consciousness, it's normal for us to have a fear of death. So within this life, we have to learn how to face our fear, how to walk with the fear in front of us, and how to actually stand up to the fear and go through it rather than trying to avoid it and run away from it. So facing fear is really the first step toward greater consciousness and living a more conscious life. And the fear of death is the ultimate fear that we have. And I'm not saying that we all need to go out and take up skydiving as our way of facing fear. It doesn't mean that you have to risk your life and do something dangerous to prove that you're not afraid of death. It's much more internal than that. It's actually being willing to look at the fact that death surrounds us, and death is actually necessary for life to take place. So it's having a willingness to allow death to be part of our day-to-day lives, part of every moment of life, and recognizing death where it exists, and also accepting the suffering that comes our way because of our mortality, and um, because of the reality of death and dying. So life constantly presents us with challenges and difficulties and various types of suffering that we have to negotiate. All of those are in service of our recognition that everything dies at some point and that we need to be able to let go. We need to be able to over and over again to let go of our attachments to all of these aspects of life that will one day fade away. So, as we face our fears, I will link in the show notes to a blog that I wrote a few years ago called 6 Steps to Rise Above Your Fear of Death. But I'm going to talk you through those those steps. And so, just the 6 things that I wrote about that we need to do, or 6 ways to help us face our fear of death. So the first thing is we have to wake up and accept. Life is full of difficulties. Death happens, and it's going to happen. We're not going to avoid it no matter what. And so the ways that we can just practically and tangibly in our day-to-day lives work on this fear, natural fear we have of death, first of all, is to begin to think about death on a regular basis, to allow thoughts about death to come into our minds. And I'm not saying become morbid or excessively fascinated with death itself, but begin to think about the fact that I'm here right now, but I won't always be here. I'm in this body right now, but I won't always be within this body. This is short-lived. My time here, where I am with the people that I love and in the places that I love and the things I like to do and taste and see and smell, that's short-lived. I will not always have that. And so allow those thoughts to come to our mind on a regular basis. The next thing that you can do is start to read about death. Read books that relate to death, that talk about death, that increase your awareness of death. And again, I'm not saying necessarily read murder mysteries or crime novels, but that could be one way that you acquaint yourself with death and put death into your mind. But there are many, many wonderful books out there right now that talk about death and tell stories of patients who have died in hospice, sometimes tragic stories, sometimes beautiful and amazing stories. And so reading is one way to inform yourself about death. Also, to write about death. Keep a journal and write some of your own thoughts, and even write down your own fears about your own death, the fears that come up when you start to imagine when you die. So write down some of your own thoughts and what you're struggling with about death in a journal. And the fourth thing is to just get educated and learn more about death, about end-of-life issues. And that's one of the reasons I recommend End of Life University interview series. It's amazing the things I've learned from doing these interviews with people who do all kinds of fascinating work around the end of life. I interviewed a coroner. I interviewed a funeral director, a woman who makes shrouds for green burial, a woman who wrote a directory of green cemeteries around the country and where they're located. I've interviewed people who do all kinds of really interesting work related to death and dying. And it's fascinating to hear what other people do and the work that they've discovered. And it's a really interesting way to educate yourself and start to learn what's out there. And fear starts to diminish and lessen as soon as we become more educated. Knowledge and education is one of the best ways we have of counteracting fear, because sometimes we're afraid of the unknown. We're afraid of what we don't understand and what we haven't seen before and what we only imagine in our fantastical imaginations to be terrible. When we start to learn more and get more knowledge, our fear goes down because we see the truth and the reality of how death and dying operate, how things really are, and how things can be for us in the future. So think, read, write, learn about death. The fifth one is to talk about death. So it's really important that we begin to include in our vocabulary words that deal with death and dying, and not avoid discussions about death. Sometimes there are people in our midst who are struggling with the death of a loved one, and we fail to talk to them because we don't know what to say and we don't know how to have a conversation, and we're afraid of the conversation about death. That's one of the weaknesses in our society. We're too quick to dismiss the subject of death and too quick to run away from it when opportunities are there to talk about it. All around you are people who have had a loved one die, who may have a story that they need to tell and want to talk about, but no one to listen to it. So become a listener and a conversationalist about death, and be willing to ask people about their stories and be willing to listen and hear their stories. Also to tell your own story. Tell people what you're thinking about, what you're struggling with, what questions are on your mind that you're wondering about, and begin to accept naturally the opportunities for conversations that come up about death, so that death becomes a more normal part of our day-to-day lives. It surrounds us. It's everywhere we go. I can't walk outside my front door without seeing the leaves that have fallen off the tree, without seeing a dead tree in my yard, the flowers that are dying now at the end of the summer. So even this morning there was a tiny baby dead mouse lying off to the side of the driveway. Death surrounds us, and when we open our eyes to it and are willing to look at it and see it as it is, death is clearly a part of our normal day-to-day lives. And so the sixth way to face your fear, to really work on your fear, is to actually work with death. And one way to do that might be to become a volunteer for a hospice, to get trained, to learn how to sit with patients and their families who are dealing with death and dying. And so that is one way. You could also become a volunteer for a nursing home or a hospital, and that would move you closer to seeing and being associated with and connected to death and dying if you were to do some volunteer work in that area. So those are 6 tangible things you can do to help you face your fear of death. And I did mention thinking, reading, and writing about death, and I have written the book, The Tao of Death, which is a rewritten version of the Tao Te Ching. If any of you have heard of that, it was written thousands of years ago by Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher. And the Tao Te Ching consists of 89 verses that kind of tell you basically the way to live life. And so I rewrote those 89 verses as the way of death, the way to live life when we're conscious of death. So I incorporated death into the Tao Te Ching. Not that the original Tao Te Ching left death out, because there are some passages that deal with death, but I kind of rewrote it so that every passage mentions death and life through this lens of death, of the way of death. And so the Tao of Death is a very simple, short little book with just 89 verses. And what I've recommended is that you can read one verse a day, and there's a companion journal that goes with the Tao of Death that has one question about the verse that you can journal on each day. And so you could create your own daily practice around facing fears of death by just reading the Tao of Death and using the journal prompts to help you. You'd read a one-sentence passage about death, think about it, contemplate it for a while, and then write about it in your journal, and that could become your practice of facing your own fear of death. And because there are 89 passages, your practice would last almost 90 days. You add one more day at the end, and they say if you do anything for 90 days, you change your habits around it. It becomes ingrained in you and becomes a part of you. So the Tao of Death is available. I'll have a link to that in the show notes also, but as just an easy way to help you work on your fear of death. If you come to terms with your fear of death, I can tell you your fear of anything and everything else in your life will diminish as well. Because ultimately, it's the fear of death that kind of fuels all of our other fears, all of our smaller fears of things. And when we've confronted that fear of death, suddenly there's not nearly as much firepower behind those other fears. Suddenly fear in general begins to go down in life. That's why contemplating death helps you be more joyful and full of love, because your fear of everything diminishes and you have more room more room within yourself for love and joy to take place. You're not wasting your energy spinning around in circles with fear. So that's what's behind Face Your Fear when I send you that wish in every episode. So now you'll know when you hear me say that what I mean and the deeper story behind Face Your Fear. The second wish that I'll talk about today is be ready. And one thing you'll know right away if you read the show notes and if you've looked at my website, when I write out be ready, I always capitalize B and E, the two letters in the word be. That word is always capitalized. Be ready. And I'll just mention the reason that I capitalize be is because that's such an important word for us. As we become more conscious and evolve and grow spiritually, part of our task and part of the work of that process is learning how to be in life rather than just doing life. And so I capitalize both letters of B to make sure that stands out. So that's like a hidden message within the wish be ready is don't forget to be. Don't forget being is what is most important, more important than doing. So let's talk more about how do you be ready and what does that mean. And so in light of the fact that you've already faced your fears and you've already accepted that life is full of difficulties, death is a natural part of life, death is inevitable, it's going to come, life doesn't last forever, I'm here for a short time, and I need to make the most of the time that I have. And so be ready means be ready for the difficulties that life might offer you. And you be ready by focusing as much as you can on what's happening in your life right now. What's going on? What's in front of you right now in this moment, and making the most of each moment at when it's here, as it is here. So instead of attaching too much to memories of the past or worrying too much about what might come in the future, keep your energy focused more on right now, what's in front of you right now, your attention and your energy here in this moment wherever you are. And so if you're walking down a sidewalk somewhere, be there on that sidewalk. Notice what's around you. Notice the people walking by. Notice the buildings near you. Notice the sky overhead. And as much as possible, get your thoughts to be right there in that place where you are on the sidewalk rather than mulling over something that happened 2 weeks ago that you're still upset about or worrying about what you're going to do tomorrow. Be in the moment. Be there and notice everything that's around you. That's one of the first steps for being ready for whatever life offers you, is having your energy right here so that you can use it to respond to changes that happen suddenly, to sudden difficulties that arise. Be in the present moment. It's also really important that you know what you value most in life. Know what really matters to you, what is most important. And this takes some work. It's a process to figure this out. You have to actually sit with yourself for a while and sort through all the many, many things that you care about in order to prioritize those things and think about what's most important to me, what matters more than anything to me. And it's necessary for you to have that in mind. What is most important, so that when you're deciding where to put your attention and your energy, because you only have a limited amount of attention and energy, when you're deciding how do you want to use your time that you have, and it's time that is fleeting, that is actually slipping away from you moment to moment, how can you put that time to the best use? By giving it to the things that matter to you the most, and not squandering time or wasting it on things that are not really important to you. So part of being ready is understanding what matters to you, know what you value most in life, and learning how to keep your attention in this present moment and giving your time and attention to those things that matter to you. So another important aspect of being ready is being realistic about the fact that most people live to an older age and experience a gradual dying process rather than a sudden dying process. So you are more likely to experience that at the end of your life when it's time for you to die than you are to die at a younger age and by an accidental, very sudden death. You're more likely to have a slower dying process. That's more common. So being realistic about that, it's very important that you prepare now while you're healthy, or at least you're as probably healthier than you will be when you come to the end of your life, that you begin to think about how would you like things to be when it is time for you to face the dying process and your own death. It's important that you think it through and consider of the options out there. I mean, you have options like hospice and palliative care. Would you like to receive primarily comfort care and be taken care of in your own home and forgo expensive and possibly painful or symptom-causing treatments? Or would you like to receive everything possible, everything the medical profession can offer you? Would you like to receive all of it and be kept alive as long as possible? It's important for you to consider the options that are out there and available to you so that you have some idea what makes sense, what fits you and your life the best, what are you the most comfortable with. And you might need to think about it for a long time, and it might change as you grow and become older and as life changes for you. But the most important thing, if you've already worked through being comfortable thinking about death every day, you'll be able to have an ongoing process of contemplation about, how do I feel about death? What might I want when it's my time? So being able to make some choices and some plans for what you want at later life, and these are all flexible choices and plans, nothing set in stone, but beginning to imagine what that period might be for you and how you would want it to be. It's very important, because if you don't think about it or make any decisions or think it through or have any choices or plans in place, if you wait until the very last moment when you're actually dying and when you have to make decisions during the midst of a crisis, it's much more difficult. And it might not even be you making the decisions because you may not be capable of it. It might be family members and your loved ones trying to make decisions on your behalf that they're not really equipped or prepared to make. So to be ready, you need to be thinking all along, kind of every day, like, life is short. It won't go on forever. How might it be when it's my time? When it's my time and I'm at the very end, how would I like that to be? What pleases me? What suits me? What would be best for me and for my family? So incorporate these thoughts about what choices you might make for yourself at the end of life as you're contemplating death. And then you actually need to take some time and complete some paperwork. And the first is to appoint a healthcare proxy. This is one of the best ways of being ready. You need to have someone in your life who loves and cares about you, who is willing to speak up for you if there ever is a time when you can't speak for yourself. You need to carefully choose that person, and there's a couple of other podcast episodes you can listen to learn about how to make the best choice possible. And I think it's episode number 105, but I'll link to it in the show notes. Talks about how to choose the right person for a healthcare proxy. But you need to talk with that person. You need to let them know what your wishes are and how you envision the end of your life being. You need to make sure they're willing to speak up for you on your behalf, and that they basically agree with you, that they're comfortable supporting your choices and what you would like to have for your life. And you need to know that person is emotionally strong enough to stand up for you, and that they'll show up and they'll be there in the ICU in the middle of the night, or come to the emergency room and be willing to leave work to go where they're needed to help with decision making. So choose the person, have the conversation with them, write it down so it's in writing that this is the person you've appointed to make choices for you. And also complete other paperwork like a living will, advance directives, for the appropriate advance directives for your state. Make sure that you have put down your wishes in writing so that other people know what it is that you want, and that it has a little bit of legal clout behind it in case decisions have to be made that are difficult and that may cause a little bit of conflict. You want your wishes to be the wishes that are followed, and they do need to be in writing, and they need to be legal documents that can stand up in a court of law if necessary. So beyond doing this thinking and contemplation about death and deciding what it is you want at the end of life, and then doing the paperwork and appointing a healthcare proxy, it's also important that you tend to your relationships, because here's one of the biggest stumbling blocks I found for patients at the end of life in hospice. Many of them had relationships that had gone badly during their lives. They had old bitterness and resentment toward people, sometimes people they hadn't seen for 20 years or more. They're carrying a lot of negative feelings, and they didn't want to have those feelings any longer. So I saw people as they were preparing to die who had to spend a lot of energy and time working through forgiveness and figuring out how to forgive people in their lives with whom things had gone badly one way or another in the past. And so this became the primary task for the vast majority of people who were facing death. But the reality is, you can begin to forgive people earlier in your life. You can start working on that at any time. You can decide, I really don't want to carry around all this negative baggage with me for the rest of my life, however much time I have. I don't really want to live that time holding on to anger and resentment and bitterness. I would like to be able to let that go. So you can begin practicing forgiveness right now. And there are some tools you can use to help you, some practices. In my book, What Really Matters, I write about forgiveness, and I have a workbook that goes with What Really Matters that has a section on forgiveness. It has some exercises you can do to help you forgive. It is extremely important in order to be ready for what life brings your way, including the end of life, that you look at forgiveness now and begin to work on how can you shift your negative energies into a more positive perspective toward other people. And so the tools, I'll link to them in the show notes, and you can find those tools if you're interested in that, or there's lots and lots of other things out there available for you on forgiveness. But I can't stress enough how important it is for you to work on forgiveness, and also, along with forgiveness, expressing love to the people you care about. Don't assume that you have endless time in your life to tell people that you love them. Don't assume that. recognize that anything can happen at any time, and that love is something meant to be expressed in the moment, right here and right now. And so take advantage of every opportunity you have to tell the people you love that you love them, to make sure they know that and that they've heard that from you. Because that's another regret I've seen from hospice patients, that they didn't spend enough time saying I love you and showing love to the people in their lives that really mattered to them. And if you've done your work of part of being ready is knowing what you value most in life, and also who you value most in life. That's one of the first steps to be ready. So as you're tending to your relationships, not only forgiving those you've had conflicts with, but remembering to love the people who are on your what really matters list, who show up as top priorities. These are the people I care about more than anything, that mean everything to me. Make sure you tell them that and that you're conveying that message. And then I mentioned already learning to be in life rather to be life rather than to do life, learning to be love rather than to do love. And that, again, that's why B is both letters are capitalized, because I can't emphasize that enough, that learning to be in the present moment is one of the most important tasks you have. Now, that sounds a little bit abstract, and it's often hard to explain to people. I don't get it. What do you mean by being rather than doing? And I'll just try to explain it briefly. I write about this in What Really Matters also, that when you focus on doing, your focus is really outside of yourself, on tasks external to you that you can do in your life, things you can accomplish, things you can, and I'm not saying that doing things doesn't matter. It's also important. But many of us spend our lives exclusively doing things outside of ourselves rather than just being. And being means accepting who you are right now in this moment. It means finding comfort in just sitting still and quiet, and just allowing yourself to sit wherever you are and notice everything around you, and also notice how you feel inside. Notice your body, notice your emotions, notice everything about yourself without busying yourself, without using your hands to accomplish something, without using your mind to think through or process something. Just notice, just sit and be still, be quiet, and notice. And that's how you be in the present moment. And so make sure that you're taking some time out every day for being. And that helps you, that helps you practice presence and coming into the present moment and noticing the present moment around you. It also makes your life incredibly rich and full, because it's interesting that no matter what is happening, and I'm always amazed by this, like, say if I'm sick in some way, like I'm going through an illness and my body doesn't feel good, I can focus my mind constantly on how bad I feel, like, oh, my back is aching, I have the chills, I feel so terrible. I can focus my mind on that. But amazingly, even in the midst of being sick, when I get really still, there are things that I start to notice when I sit still, that I start to notice about myself, and that I might actually feel that there's something pleasant about the sickness itself. There's something pleasant about being wrapped up in a cozy blanket. There's something pleasant about the tea that I'm drinking, and that even in the midst of this sickness, even in the midst of the suffering, that when I start to just be present and just let those symptoms be there, I start to notice that there's much more to the experience than just the negative physical feelings that I have or the emotional feelings that I have. So I know that may not make sense to you if you've never had the experience of being in the moment, but I wanted to describe it to you so that you could begin to watch for those times when you could become still and quiet and experience being yourself. And that leads us directly into the third wish, which is love your life. And so this is, in some ways, it's the most important of the three wishes, but you can't really love your life fully until you face your fear and until you learn how to be. And so this is why it's the third wish in many ways. And it's the third wish, and it cycles back through, because as soon as you learn how to love your life, you'll actually be able to face your fear even more easily, and you'll actually be even more ready for whatever comes your way. So these three wishes continually cycle around one another. But when I say love your life, I am asking you to find a way to love what is happening in the present moment. And I just described being sick and finding something within even an illness that can be pleasant, something that I can actually say that I kind of enjoy within the midst of being miserable and sick. And so love your life means to have the mindset always that there is love within every situation, no matter how terrible, no matter how tragic, no matter how painful. There is love everywhere. There's love at the heart of every situation. Love is the gem inside every dark cloud that you encounter. It's the silver lining, so to speak. And you need to have a mindset of looking for the love and learning to find the love in every situation that you're in. If your mind gets caught up in the negativity and the pain and the suffering and worrying and complaining about that, you might miss the love that is contained within that particular situation. So you have to have an awareness that love is here. I can find love if I'm open to it and willing to see it and willing to look for it. So this is it's a mindset shift, and it's also a shift in behavior in some ways, because you are going to shift your behavior away from focusing only on what is negative about this current situation to making room for what is full of love in this situation. And one of the practices that you can take up in order to start to find the love is the practice of gratitude. And that simply means, if you can begin it by every day in your life, as you're going to bed at night, think of one thing that you're grateful for that happened during the day. No matter how bad a day it was or how miserable, think of one thing that you're grateful for. And I remember, I described being sick. I remember having the flu and being so achy and with a fever and feeling miserable. But I remember that my husband brought me some wonton soup from our favorite Chinese restaurant, and that soup was the most amazing thing I'd ever eaten. The warmth of the soup and the saltiness and the chicken broth and the little wontons was incredible. And so that simple small thing was the object of my gratitude that day, and gratitude for my husband who was willing to go pick that up for me and bring it home for me. So you see, we can be grateful for sometimes the smallest and the simplest things. And sometimes, it's looking out the window and seeing the sunset or noticing a flower. Or it's even seeing someone walk by with a smile on their face and kind of being touched by that and being delighted by that. Finding the smallest things to be grateful for, even in the most difficult times, even when everything is falling apart, even when tragedy is all around us and when we are feeling hopeless and desperate, but remembering gratitude. And the best way to do that, again, is to have a journal where you intentionally write down something that you're grateful for every day, because it forces you to shift your thinking. You have to suddenly think of, oh, wait, what did happen today that I could feel positive about? And when you require yourself to write one thing down, you have to change your thought process just enough toward the positive, to see one thing that you can be grateful for. As you start to practice that gratitude every day, the love that is within every situation begins to become more obvious to you. And so gratitude begins to expand your awareness of just how much love surrounds you at all times, how much love is within you, how much love is all around you. And you become more and more able, you're training yourself through gratitude to see the love wherever it exists. And more you will be able to find the love in the situations around you. So this is what I mean about love your life. And some people, there is my children told me about, I don't know if it's on Facebook or a website, that is called the opposite of love your life. It's called F My Life, the F word, F My Life, where people post all the time and write all the negative things that are happening in life, and they almost try to top one another by describing how bad life is for them. And it kind of breaks my heart. It's a very popular website, and lots of people post comments there and write about how terrible their life is. And we can choose to spend our time thinking about all of the things that are wrong in this world and wrong in our lives, or at least that we believe are wrong. All of the things that cause us pain, all the things we don't understand, all the ways we're confused, all the ways we're hurting right now and feeling wounded, we can choose to focus all of our attention and energy on that, and what we pay attention to ends up expanding and growing, because to our brains, if we're paying lots of attention to it, it must be the most important thing. It must be what really matters if we're giving all of our attention to it. So if we decide that the script for our life is F my life, or my effing life, as some people might say, we're actually going to create that as our reality of life just because we're devoting our attention to it. But if we decide, I have a life in which there's at least one thing I can be grateful for every single day, we can begin at that point. There is at least one thing I can be grateful for from today. We start at that point, and as our gratitude grows, our recognition of love grows, and we're suddenly moving more and more toward this positive lens and positive awareness of life itself, positive consciousness about life itself. And then that positivity, the love, the gratitude and joy, those begin to grow because now our attention is focused on those. The brain interprets, oh, this is what is important. This is what really matters. So the task to take on, if you want to learn how to love your life, first is gratitude. Express gratitude for at least one thing every day. It's helpful if you write it down in a journal, because that's an amazing journal to read later on when you're having a really tough day, is to sit down with your gratitude journal and read through the pages where you've written in the past all the things that you're grateful for. It's a huge reminder that life is not just full of woe and full of suffering and full of those difficulties we talked about. Life is also full of miracles and love and wonder and amazement in every moment. And if you're looking for it, you'll be able to find it. So another corollary is, once you begin to love your life and you begin to experience this gratitude and love for life, you'll be able to start to fill all the empty places of life with love. And what I'm trying to describe here is that you actually feel yourself becoming full of love. You actually feel yourself filling up every day, taking in love and filling up with it. All the love that you start to recognize and see around you, you fill yourself with. And then you become a vessel for that love, and you can channel it and give it away to others and send it out to others. And suddenly you're using love to make the world a better place. This love that you're taking in is helping you heal all of your own wounds, helping you become healthier and more conscious every single day. But you're also spreading that love and sharing it and helping to heal the world around you. And so you envision that this love that you're carrying now, that you're a vessel for, is going to fill every empty place around you. It's going to fill everything. And so you can fill up the darkness with the light of love. You can fill up someone else's painful, hopeless life with love just by allowing yourself to become this vessel that can carry love. And so love is one of the things that really matters in life. And as you begin to focus your attention more positively, you will also begin to live your life according to what really matters to you. Those things that you may have prioritized and thought about when you were preparing yourself to be ready for what happens, suddenly you have a much greater capacity to make sure that you're living from what really matters to you, that you're living those things every day. You're living love for others. You're living forgiveness and practicing it in every moment. You're living your purpose. You're finding meaning in your life in every day, in every way. And so love your life becomes the ultimate key to living consciously, but also to being able to die consciously. Because if you have spent your days in love with being here, with who you are, with everything that you do, even with everything that happens to you in your life, when the time comes for your life to cycle down, for your life to gradually slip away and dissolve away from you, you will have an easier time letting that happen in a natural way, because that life you have lived has been so full of love and miracles and joy. You will know that you have lived such a life of incredible value and worth and meaning on this planet that you can accept that your time is up, that you've had your turn, you've had your run, your time is up. And you won't be afraid of letting life go, as some people I have found are afraid of letting go of life because they don't feel like they've lived. They don't feel like they've even understood at all what life is about or why they're here. And then suddenly they're at the end of it, and they're full of regret and remorse because it's already time to die and they never once felt like they actually lived. If you start to love your life right now and live your life in this full, conscious way, when it comes time for you to die, and it will absolutely come, there will be a time when you're ready, you will be able to let it slip through your fingers. You will be able to let the natural process of dying happen. And you'll still feel gratitude during that process, and you'll still feel love, and you will see how perfect it is because you've already had this amazing, rich, and full life right up until that very last breath that you take. So once again, what I share with you in every single episode that I hope can be true for you is to face your fear. Look it square in the eye and be willing to go through fear. Be willing to walk right into it and right through it. Do not let fear make you run away from your life. Take fear head on and go into it. Face up to your fear. Find a way to live with your fear and to hold it every day. Keep it in front of you and hold it every day. And then be ready. Be ready for anything that comes. Know that you're doing your work every day and every moment. You're doing what you came here for. You're learning, you're growing, you're loving. So anything can happen at any time, but it won't come as a shock or such a disappointment to you because you've already been preparing for anything to happen at any time. You spend your life that way every day in every moment. And you're loving your life every day in every moment, which makes you less afraid, which makes you more prepared. And this cycle continues to go on and on. And once again, it's an incredible, amazing cycle of growth and evolution and consciousness that you can live with throughout your life. But that goes with you as you're dying. That consciousness is ingrained in the dying process. You will be fully conscious of the love and the joy that you've experienced as you're dying. You will be awash in the love and the light that you have experienced throughout your life when it's time for you to die. And even if you have to face some pain, if you have to face some anxiety at the end of life, you will have all the tools available to you to cope with that and to deal with it because you've been developing the tools your entire life by living consciously. So I'm going to close the topic now. I hope that you have found this enlightening and rich for you to consider. This is what I'm always trying to tell you, I guess, in every other thing I talk about in every other episode. It's kind of summed up by these 3 keys: face your fear, be ready, and love your life. And so today and in every other time you listen to a podcast episode, I hope that you can take that message with you. I hope that you will be able to begin to live in this way. Start simple. Start at the very beginning with fear. That's the first thing to deal with. Gradually develop and build on these 3 keys as you go through time. And my hope for you is that you will become more and more able to fully live consciously, and when the time comes, to be able to die consciously. So thanks for joining me for this conversation. Thanks for tuning in and listening to this episode. I'll be talking to you live again when I'm back from Italy in about 1 month. And until then, enjoy the episodes I've pre-recorded for you that I worked really hard to put out there for you. And talk to you live in a month, but there's a new episode every single Monday, so tune in, and do not forget to face your fear, be ready, and love your life. Until the next time we're together, goodbye.